Aquí se ve.
Because you've always taken such charge.
Justo antes del aguacero.
You are listening to the Border Chronicle.
Voices from the Border and Sierra Club. Borderlands put this presentation on together and did a lot of hard work to make it happen. And I really have to thank Erick Meza, who has really been a source of support and help and a co-partner on this throughout the whole thing. We are here today to watch the writers of the Border Chronicle create a podcast. And they are two working journalists, and you're going to be watching them work. If we have some audio issues, you might find they have to do audio checks, or it's a working session here. There is a slight change of plan. Erick Meza is going to be the sole interviewee today, and he's doing double duty. So not only did he help plan it, he's also going to be the interviewee. So he's going to be really tired after this. I will say the plan here still is in existence for you guys to potentially be part of this podcast. So, get your questions. I would say that unlike Las Vegas, what happens on the border doesn't stay on the border. It goes all over the country. And it often goes all over the country in very distorted and very damaging ways. And it is really important that we have the Border Chronicle to tell the stories of what's happening truly and realistically and actually on the border. Voices from the Border thinks this is one of the most important voices from the border that we have. Without journalism that really hits the nail on the head, really digs deeply into the issues, we would really be lacking here in the Borderlands. I would say that it is true that Voices from the Border, the Sierra Club Borderlands, and the Tin Shed, all nonprofits, we all need donations, and I would encourage you all to donate as much as you can, whenever you can, to these groups. But our purpose here today is about the Border Chronicle. We would like folks to really consider subscribing with paid subscriptions to this service, because we want to keep them in business for a long time. And we also would like you to consider giving gift certificate or gifting your relatives and friends who don't live on the border and telling, who ask you all kinds of questions about the border. You can say, hey, I'm giving you a subscription to the Border Chronicles. Read it, you'll find out. Especially those ones who say, aren't you scared living down there? So with that, I'm going to turn this over to India Aubrey, who is the president of the board of directors of Voices from the Border. And she's going to do some bios of the three people sitting here. India.
Well, first I want to acknowledge Maggie, who is the outreach coordinator for Voices from the Border and a fellow board member. And she conceived of this very novel idea, which we thought was brilliant. And thanks for playing along. And thank you to Casina, as Maggie said, who's always a tremendous help and supportive in these endeavors. So thank you, Maggie, for thinking of this very innovative idea, which could potentially turn into a series, depending upon how things go. So let me start with welcoming Melissa Del Bosque and Todd Miller. And they're both journalists from Tucson and co-write the Border Chronicle, and which is an online source for original and investigative analysis from the U.S.-Mexico border. Collectively, they have about 40 years of experience in the field, correct, reporting? And have been in media outlets from the New York Times to In These Times, as well as writing several books. So Todd is well loved here, pretty well known in Patagonia. He's been here several times promoting his book signings. His most recent one, Build Bridges, Not Walls. So he was here, was it last year? I think it was last spring. Yeah, I think last spring. So We are big fans here, and I just recently found out that you've spent a long time living and working in Oaxaca, Mexico, and hails from Buffalo, Niagara Falls area, and is a long-suffering Bulls fan as well. And he is a recipient of the 2018 Izzy Award for Excellence in Independent Journalism. But perhaps his biggest accomplishment is he recently survived a month-long road trip with two toddlers. So that must be acknowledged. That's nothing short of heroic. So Melissa Del Bosque moved to Tucson in March of 2021 after spending a couple of eventful years in Mexico City during the pandemic, as I understand it. And from 2007 to 2018, she worked for the Texas Observer, which is a statewide progressive magazine where she won an Emmy, a National Magazine Award, and several other national journalism prizes for her reporting on the Texas-Mexico border. Erick Meza is the Borderlands coordinator for Sierra Club, and Erick was born in the Sonoran Desert of Mexico, and his work is to promote a holistic approach on community development and understanding of how all the complex dynamics of the borderlands affect the frontline communities and the environment of this region. So without further ado, I'll hand this over to Todd and Melissa to begin the program. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Hi, thank you all for coming. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you to Voices from the Border and to Sierra Club and to all of you who came out today. I guess maybe we'll get a rainstorm while we're in here. We'll see. I think I just heard thunder. Hopefully we don't lose power. That could be kind of exciting though. So we are the Border Chronicle, Todd and I, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. For a long time, I was in Texas, as you heard from my bio. I moved out here recently, and I covered the Texas-Mexico border for about 20 years. And throughout that time, I've admired Todd's work, and I feel like Todd's like my Arizona counterpart. And we always talked about doing something together where we could report on the border from a border community perspective for a national audience. Somebody who is here in the community and not parachuting into the border region and then kind of putting their spin on it for whatever publication they're working on. So we started this in September of 2021. Around 9/11, because we wanted to talk about the Department of Homeland Security, which was formed after 9/11 and which really changed the border profoundly in terms of, the militarization, the wall construction, which we're going to talk about pretty in depth with Erick. So we cover a number of issues. My sort of current obsession is with the rhetoric around the border and the political rhetoric. If you see up there, I've got selling chaos at the border. I mean, a lot of the coverage, and you all know you live here, but if you talk to your relatives or friends who live in other states far from the border, they think that we're in a war zone and that, there's bullets flying. And it's just death and destruction, 24/7. And as, of course, we know that that's not true. And leading up to the midterm elections, things have really gotten ratcheted up in terms of invasion rhetoric. So I write a lot about, how this invasion rhetoric is used to really promote this very sort of racist narrative, xenophobic narrative, to get people elected on a very sort of xenophobic and sort of racist platform. So what we do is we cover the entire border because we're insane. We're based in Tucson, but we cover the whole almost 2,000 miles. So so that's challenging, which is why we're trying to build our subscriber base so that we can get more resources to be able to drive to different communities. Recently, I went out to Yuma, Arizona, which has been used as a backdrop for a lot of political ads you may have seen with that invasion type rhetoric. But what is happening is that the border, since March 2020, with Title 42 and Remain in Mexico and these different programs, has been basically shut down to asylum seekers. And in Yuma, there are these gaps in the wall where asylum-seeking families and so forth have been presenting. And so I was there, and one thing I like to do is to compare different communities along the border. Because I spent so much time in Texas, I find it really interesting to see how some communities are different, but they also have a lot of similarities. And one problem in the Rio Grande Valley, which is the southernmost tip of Texas, is that people down there are finding a lot of passports, birth certificates, and really important confidential documents belonging to asylum seekers that have been dumped on the U.S. side of the border, which is very unusual. And this has been happening now for a couple of years since the pandemic. And you'll see backpacks and all of people's, the things that they really hold dear are been dumped. So when I was in Yuma, I noticed the same thing. I mean, there were these big dumpsters full of people's possessions, and then there were, passports from Haiti, from Cuba, things that people would not part with unless it was taken away from them, that were on the ground. And so I thought, this is interesting. Why is this happening on the U.S. side of the wall? Because there's a common narrative where they'll say, oh, well, the human smugglers tell the migrants that they, ditch your confidential documents, south of the border so they can't identify you. There's these narratives that go around, but it's actually not true. And plus, this is happening on the U.S. side of the wall anyway, so obviously something else is going on there. So I did a story, saying, look, this is happening in Texas, this is happening in Arizona, this is unusual. So, I called Customs and Border Protection. I said, hey, here's all these photographs I'm sending you of people's passports laying in the dirt, next to these garbage dumpsters. What's going on? And of course, they give me some sort of amorphous type of non-response. But they are now investigating it. The new commissioner, who's of CBP, who's the former police chief of Tucson, Chris Magnus, is now doing an investigation to find out what exactly is going on there. And then there was a protest in Phoenix, so it's good that there's been some traction on that, and I'm hoping now that we can get a protest going in Texas, where at the other site where a lot of people's documents are being trashed by Border Patrol, including like X-rays that children brought with them, to show that they have a steel rod in their spine, for an asylum claim. So what we're trying to do is, just because we've been doing this for so long, I think, context is important and history is important, and to point that out in a story about the border, because a lot of the stuff that we see happening here happens in a cyclical fashion, I would say. So we just really try to have that context in the history in the coverage from the local community perspective, but for a larger audience, to just sort of try to push back against the misinformation and the disinformation. One popular term that we really talk about in Texas a lot is border theater. And if you notice, the Governor Abbott in Texas is very much about border theater. I mean, he's done, the steel wall of state police cars. He's done, barbed wire. He had, when I was in Del Rio not long after the Haitians were there, and he had brought out the National Guard, and they had Humvees lining, the highways with their guns pointed towards the river, and like some really bored National Guard soldiers looking at their cell phones because there was really nothing to battle, but it's a lot of it is about visuals. So so we often refer to that as border theater or political theater. So I was supposed to talk 10 or 15 minutes. Has it already been 10 minutes? I probably should have put a timer out because I'm gonna. Okay, so I'm gonna pass the mic over to Todd.
I think it wasn't that. I think it was almost right? It was right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Melissa. It's great. It's really great to be here again in Patagonia for me. Been here many times. I'm loving how green it is. The drive down from Tucson was just pretty spectacular. So it's nice to be here. And I want to again thank Voices from the Border for sponsoring this event and being and doing the introduction and along with Sierra Club, of course, Borderlands. And I wanted to mention too, in some of my reporting, I mean, I've collaborated with Voices from the Border, who have helped me, for example, go interview people in Nogales and different places where Voices is working, such as I was able to go to some apartments where asylum seekers are staying, which probably some people know about here, and interview families and who are staying there. And it's a remarkable place because you go to this apartment and you can go out to the balcony and look, and from the apartment you can see the border. You can see the 20-foot wall, bollard style wall in the distance. You see the rolling hills of Nogales. You can see one of those fixed towers that are looking into Mexico. You can see a green striped Border Patrol vehicle. And behind that, you can see the Santa Rita Mountains, right, in the distance. And it's a weird contrast, the gorgeousness of the Santa Ritas and Mount Wrightson and Mount Hopkins in the distance, and then the border apparatus. And then you're in this apartment talking with families who are, fleeing often, in this case, or often fleeing, really violent situations, but they're stopped at that borderline. And just that collaboration, with Voices from the Border, and as one example, and being able to get in and talk to these families, you get to learn the real stories, right? You hear. Well, when you think about Title 42, for example, you hear lots of stories about Title 42, but when you go and talk to the families, and they say how they go to the port of entry and they're rejected at the port, right? And you're getting this story, right? You're getting this really on the ground perspective, which is what we're trying to do, a lot with the Border Chronicle. In fact, Melissa's article on Tuesday really goes into that subject as well. She went to Keynote Border Initiative and talked to people there. But I wanted to mention one story. I was there at these apartments, and there was a 2-year-old and a family named Gabriela, and we were looking out the back towards the border wall and then towards Mount Wrightson, and she asked, and I thought this was the best question of the day, really, that better than any question I asked the whole day. She asked, why can't we, like a bunny, right, jump over that border wall and go to those beautiful mountains? I'm like, good question, Gabriela. Just an example of what we can do with and get that kind of journalism. the journalism also of the unexpected, I guess you could say. And then speaking of Title 42, I wanted to mention that we started maybe about six months ago doing what we call discussion forums or discussion threads. And one of them was on actually Title 42. So we invite experts who will come in and talk with subscribers for the Border Chronicle, and like, for example, experts on Title 42. So if you had questions about Title 42, what is this thing? How long is it going to last? When is there any possibility it's going to end? You know, you can come and talk to all these people that are in the know, and often people that are in the know, right? Like they know what's going on in a deep sort of way. And that's something that we've been proud of, you know, starting to do these threads, which are basically online, but we're thinking, oh, maybe, you know, we could do forums, you know, where we have panelists and it's a video forum where people can come in. But a lot of it, we're thinking also, it's really important to us is to have this interaction with the readership and the subscribers, and that like right now, like what we're experiencing right now, that everyone's a part of this. Like it's not just us, it's like everyone, where was an interaction or intercambio, as I say, you know, like an exchange. And that's an important part of our journalism. I also wanted to mention, like, one of the themes that I've done a lot of reporting on is technology, and looking at the technology part of it. And that's like, for example, has people here have heard of the robotic dogs? I'm sure of that, right? Have no one? Okay, some people have, some people haven't. Yeah, so the robotic dogs are just first of all, it's an example. Robotic dogs, they were announced by Department of Homeland Security as gone through tests in February, and they could be deployed on the border as maybe automated Border Patrol agents. You know, can you imagine? So part of the reporting that I've done, like I went to the Border Security Expo in San Antonio, and I actually got to meet what I will call a robo-dog. And I went and to the booth and talked to the vendor, and right behind the vendor was a big picture of the robotic dog with a slogan underneath it that said, "Robots that feel the world," right? And then the vendor did a demonstration and brought the robotic dog in all its golden chrome glory right up to me and started wagging its tail back and forth. And right when that was happening, another man, and this is the sort of stuff that happens when you're on the ground at places like the Border Security Expo or the different places you can report on, a man stepped right to the side and said, "Oh, that's cute," you know, because the robo-dog was actually, I hate to admit it, looked cute. And the man said, you know, and I assume I don't know what he was in plain clothes, so I'm not sure, but he said, "So can you weaponize this dog?" And then the vendor said, "Yes, you can weaponize a dog." And then he saw me like perk up and begin to write in my notebook, and he kind of silent. He became quiet. So looking at the technology, it's an important part right now, you know, like looking at the border. There's, of course, a lot of discussion, and rightfully so, of the border wall, but also technology has been a big thing that the Biden administration has been promoting, and looking to, like, at the kind of privatization part of it. And there's been 105,000 contracts issued from Customs and Border Protection and ICE to private companies from 2008 to 2020, worth $55 billion. So looking at this kind of nexus, or I would call an industrial complex, and how that works in Washington and how that shapes policy, that's also that's been an important theme for a lot of my reporting. My Thursday piece was on facial recognition, if anyone's interested in learning more about that, which is So that's a part of it. And also the last thing I want to talk about before we go into our interview is our podcasts. And our podcasts are, we've started actually right from the start doing podcasts twice a week. One is, oh, sorry, yeah, not twice a week, twice a month. And we actually I should say our pieces come out twice a week. We like every Tuesday and Thursday we have so twice a week for our pieces, which are often written pieces, or they could be the podcasts or something else. But the podcasts are twice a month, and we usually interview people like Erick, experts, a wide variety of different, people that have an experience with the Borderlands. They offer oftentimes just great insight and knowledge and deepen understanding, and we like to offer this audio kind of format. And if you go back to our first podcast, you'll see how far we have come. The first podcast was, I think it was really long, and the audio was bad. We had no intro, we had no closing. It was a truly, I think it was a work of art. When you do good work of art, you have a draft of something, and it's awesome. But it still was, yeah. Maybe I'm trying to look at it optimistically here, but it's Amy Wan, who people who are familiar with Amy Wan from the Tohono Nation. Amy Wan is like a visionary, So her words, are that's who the first podcast was, and that was about 1 year ago. So here we are, a year later, with you, and we're doing our very first podcast that's live. So congratulations to all of us. Yeah, and so I wanted to, and I know that there's a lot of people that are interested in climate change here in Patagonia, at least that I've in other discussions that I've had here, and I would recommend there was a podcast with Amali Tower of the climate refugees that we did maybe a couple months ago, and I'd recommend going to listen to that. And climate change, of course, is another one of the big issues that we're looking at, and that kind of intersection of climate, displacement, and borders, and trying to make those connections journalistically, and you should expect a series of pieces on that coming up, especially as we gear up for the next UN summit on climate. So that's coming your way. And along those lines, I just wanted to say, that in environmental aspects of the border are really important for us, and journalistically speaking, and that's why it's really great to be here and have Erick Meza here with us to interview as our year. I guess has it been a year since our first podcast, or has it been 11 months?
As of September. Yeah.
As of September.
Late September, yeah.
All right, so not quite a year. I'm estimating, but it's almost a year. And you could go back, like we've had a bunch, so many like really interesting interviews. So half by Melissa and half by myself, and they're just across the board. And one last thing, we're trying to expand the podcasting. Like we want to do some more audio reporting, and that's why, again, we're hoping for, the more subscribers we get, the more resources we get, the more we're able to do more stuff. Right now we're doing 2 podcasts a month. We probably want to do more, like 3 or 4, or even more than that. We want to hire an audio editor who helps us, because we're kind of audio novices challenge, yeah. So novices, yeah. So bringing in like some more people in that sense, and be able to do reporting that way. But anyhow, but it's great to be here in this first kind of live audio podcast for us. And thank you, Erick, for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. And we are really excited to learn about what you have to share and the insight that you bring to this really super important issue on the Borderlands. And I just wanted to start out like with the first question to you. First of all, just like thinking about there's news recently of the Biden administration was going to continue construction of the wall around Yuma. I guess filling in the gaps, so to speak. And it just got me thinking about, the campaign that happened during the Trump years. It got me thinking also about, the environmental damage, the wall construction, what happened with the wall construction. I can't help to think about like the chopped up saguaros, on those dirt roads, or the Quito Baquito springs, the sacred springs that were almost dried up. And so I wanted to hear from you, like what has been the environmental damage that you've seen, and what do you see as a community response to that, including the Sierra Club Borderlands? And I have one other like addendum to it, which is I remember like a few years back, Sierra Club Borderlands was also really concerned with the road construction. I'm sure that's still the case, like going through like Organ Pipe National Monument and Cabeza Prieta Wildlife Refuge of what is there, like 12,000 miles of wildcat roads, mainly done by the Border Patrol, and thinking about this technological infrastructure, which also,
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to get started by also acknowledging everybody in the room, especially organizers and everybody who made some time this Saturday to come up and talk about these really important issues that we all as Borderlands community face. And it's just an honor to be here. I think Todd and Melissa are like a big inspiration. I always look up forward for their article of the week, and I highly encourage you also to learn more about the work that they do.
Nope, it died again. I have a feeling it's the batteries. Try again.
Hello, okay. So I can project my voice eventually if that happens again. So I just want to also say, just a reminder, my name is Erick Meza. I'm the Borderlands coordinator for Sierra Club. My preferred pronouns are he, him, el, and I'm so happy to be here on the ancestral and occupied lands of Otan people and Apache and many other tribes that might have called this place home as well. I'm really thankful to be here, and beautiful place as I drove by, how green it is, and hopefully we get some rain. And I've been being part of the Borderlands work for the last year, but I've been a Borderlands person my whole. So one of the things, I grew up in Mexico in a small town called Guaymas. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. Yeah, so Guaymas is my hometown. So since I can remember, like I started traveling to the border because I had the privilege to own a tourist visa, my parents at that time. So I would come and get my Christmas presents from Nogales and be super happy, go home. Anyway, so I've been like, honestly to you, when I first started this work, I was so overwhelmed because there are so many different intersections that meet right here at the border, right? I was Sierra Club being an environmental organization. Ooh, we have a recorded one. Okay. Sound check here. Can you hear me better? Awesome. All right. So being an environmental organization, soon realized that the environment, it is threatened by a lot of different outside forces that are happening here. And by doing environmental work, we cannot really forget about immigration work, because some of the important things that are like the things that are affecting the most the environment on the borderlands are usually migration related. And I'm talking about the border wall. I think for you all to start getting a little bit of a sense of how this happened, it's really important to know some very important parts of history, like things that really changed the way that the government started doing action in the borderlands, especially after 9/11. I think when 9/11 happened, seems like when you started doing a lot of your work, also the government started putting a lot of attention in the border as a target. That was where most of the illegal terrorists were coming into the country, so they start creating something that is called the Real ID Act. This is really important for us because during the Real ID Act, they created a section called the 102 section. With that section, they allow the government to waive all the laws that are meant to protect the environment. Pretty much any law that you can imagine that is meant to protect the environment, like Clean Water Act, migratory birds, clean air, archaeological sacred grounds for Native Americans. Pretty much anything that you can imagine is there and has been waived for them to start building border walls. So what that tells you right away is that the government doesn't really protect the borderlands as it does with the rest of the country, right? The laws here don't apply anymore. That's when when the organization started doing some of the work in the borderlands, because we noticed right away that the substitution, because there has been some kind of vehicle barriers, also known as Normandy barriers back in the day, that stop vehicles from passing through. But after 2005, they start building some kind of a fence. When you look at that fence, honestly, the first thing that you look at is like, wow, I can easily jump that fence, right? You can jump that fence, you can cut through that fence, you can go around that fence. But the question is, do animals that live on this desert, that have been living on this desert for thousands of years, are they able to do that? And the answer is no. They won't be able to do that. Instead of that, they will look at these barriers and turn around and probably go away because they pose a threat for them. There's something unknown, it's not relatable to them, so we're cutting already what it is a territory for a species, in some cases an endangered species, already on half. So we are also cutting their chances of survival on half. That's what started in 2005, but then obviously when Donald Trump came into president, things started getting worse and worse, as the motto of his campaign was build the wall, supported by a lot of Americans. And who's gonna pay for it? Mexico, right? And people realized soon enough that it was not Mexico who was paying for it. So also we start looking at the new design of border wall that was happening and all of the investment that was going. But because all of those laws were waived, and Donald Trump didn't waive those environmental laws, but he waived laws in regards to contractors that were gonna do the wall, so he can actually hire people that will put money back into his campaign. Then we start realizing that a lot of the work that was happening, it was happening really fast. And it was happening with nobody really paying too much attention to it. The things that you will see on the media were very little, and they were usually a photo op of somebody just right next to the wall saying, oh, look how beautiful it is. That's gonna solve all of our problems. But nobody was able to see what are like what's called staging stations, which are giant clear cuts in the middle of the desert by acres, and where they were mixing materials to do the foundation of the border wall. We're talking about masses, huge amounts of concrete. So we got piles of piles of gravel, sand, and concrete being mixed on site. As Todd mentioned, they were also pumping a lot of water from the desert, water tables, opening new roads, enhancing the roads that were already existing by double, sometimes three times the size, blasting tops of mountains, creating a lot of erosion on really steep hills, blocking canyons with all of this explosion, all the debris that blew out. It was just piling up into canyons, not allowing what's called the sheet flow of water moving from one side of the border to another. And there is a lot of different impacts that people was not aware that was happening. So I think some of the biggest work that we do is just raise awareness and show people what's happening and what they can do about it. So I'm gonna stop right there. Maybe if there is more questions about that later, we can continue talking about environmental impacts, but yeah, I tend to talk too much, so.
Well, thank you so much. That was super informative. And is this off again? No. Okay, I just need to talk louder into the microphone. So yeah, I had a lot of thoughts while you were talking, and coming from Texas. I mean, one thing I'm very interested in is the different dynamics from state to state in trying to get people to care about the environment and the wall, because in Texas, that's a very, very hard case. And this is maybe even unfair to ask you because you represent Arizona. But I used to work in the Texas legislature for a senator from the border, and I worked in the environmental committee. And any kind of like progressive environmental bill that would come up, would just die a horrible death because of the oil and gas industry, for one thing, because they are so powerful and there's so much lobbying, there's so much money. And always when we would try to talk about the environmental issues around the border wall, they just get quashed, like, oh, you're worrying about some little crane or some sort of, rodent, and it's very tough there, I think, in terms of making an environmental case. And I was always very, very. It was so nice to see Arizona, because I mean, you have a real environmental community here. There's a lot of organizing in comparison to. It's just such a tough environment in Texas. And then, of course, we have New Mexico and California, which have a different dynamic. Right now, the Rio Grande Valley, which I mentioned earlier, that's the senator I worked for represented that area, and I've done a lot of reporting in that area over the years. They're in a terrible drought right now, and there's drought restrictions where they're cutting the water. And a report just came out that they're pulling water out of the canal to build the border wall. Even though the farmers can't use the water, people are restricting their showers, but they're still, and the border wall construction has continued down there too, under the guise of it's a levee, is what they're saying, because they have an unusual situation down there, because they have this massive levee floodway because they're right there on the river. So the wall is built about a mile or a mile and a half in. And then they have this massive floodway. So it's what it is a levee. So they've now built like a 30-foot wall on top of the levee. So they never actually stopped constructing the wall there, because they say they're fixing the levee in quotation marks, when really they're just filling in all the gaps that were left once Trump took office. And so at this moment, they're just pulling water out of like the irrigation canals to keep building the wall that they started under Trump. So actually, that's a long comment, and but I mean, if you could talk about just sort of the challenge for the Sierra Club in making a case for the environment, and the different dynamics from state to state, and sort of how do you strategize that, or how do you deal with that?
Thank you. Yeah, and in order to answer that question, I'd like to give credit to the Border Coalition, which is coalition that has been formed from many different environmental groups that exist in different states. So through that coalition, we were able to do some network from people doing work in California. Arizona always get the most representation, to be honest. We are in a state that definitely have a lot of people that is concerned about the environment. We also take a big part of the border wall. Arizona is big. We do have some people from Texas as well, but definitely we can use more. There is a lot of things happening in Texas, as you mentioned. One of the things that come to the top of my mind is the National Butterfly Center. And I don't know if some of you are familiar with this site that exists in Hidalgo, is the county in Texas. And it's just a beautiful space for community to gather, that it is, the whole mission is to protect and restore the environment for more butterflies to be able to live there. And it was the border wall. They have always been opposing the border wall because it goes right in front of the property and interrupts the migration back and forth from some of these butterfly species. Recently, it was actually shut down because there was more construction going on, and there was some threats to the staff of the center by QAnon conspiracies. So it got really bad, and we definitely offering a lot of support. Sierra Club, in collaboration with this center, created a movie called Ay Mariposa, which I recommend if you're able to look, that tells the story about this center. Right now, there is a lot of things happening in California as well. Some of you might be familiar with Friendship Park, which is a park located right in the border of Tijuana and San Diego, right at the coastline. And they are also right now, as we speak, trying to build, or they call it, replace some of the old wall and build that new type of wall. Will completely stop or shut down access to people that wants to come out and take a look at the garden. Local activists over there created a binational garden, which I think is just such a beautiful thing to do on a border, you know, like really build those relationships and around something really positive, where families could come and see each other after years of not seeing each other, and with Border Patrol supervision, of course. And now recently, Border Patrol decided to shut it down during the pandemic and bulldoze all of the plants that were planted there to attract pollinators and close access to families there. So there has been a big campaign to reopen Friendship Park. I highly encourage everybody to look at their website and sign up the petition as well. Thankfully, through this petition that just went out last week, Border Patrol, or Department of Homeland Security, paused the construction of border wall so they can get some community input. Just like gives us some hope, at least, that there is, like, when community gets together and actually get some action going and really speaks out for themselves, things can happen. So I think that has inspired a movement also here in Arizona, and we'll continue to doing those, putting that pressure, you know, where it needs to be.
Thanks. And I would suggest Melissa actually wrote a series on the National Butterfly Center called Butterflies and Barbarians. Is that right? Or Barbarians? Butterflies and Barbarians. So I highly recommend that series, especially, you know, all the challenges that Erick was just mentioning. She gets it down in the text as well. So Erick, I did want to ask you too about, you know, like the Borderlands project, but also in the context of, now, from what I understand, in the Sierra Club, there's been a history where there's been differing, I guess you could say, opinions on immigration, right? Including some pretty strong anti-immigrant stances, right, in the past. And so I'm curious, like, to ask you about that, about those historic dynamics within the Sierra Club, and how that has formed the Borderlands work, and how is it still something, a dynamic in what you're doing right now, like how yeah, so the historic dynamic, and is it affecting you still, or is that something that's been resolved and it's in the past and you're moving forward?
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, and just a Sierra Club, like going even further back in history. Some of you are familiar with the organization. Some of you might not heard about it before, but it's this year we are in the 130th anniversary. So it's one of the oldest environmental organizations in the country, and it was founded by one person called John Muir. Some of you might be familiar as well with John Muir. And we also like to acknowledge that history, even as we recognize some of the achievements that John Muir did, we also like to acknowledge that he did pretty racist comments towards Black and indigenous people. So that part of the history, I think for us, in order to move forward in an inclusive way, we need to acknowledge those harms that created. Even so later he apologized. I mean, we still like to say that that was not okay, and it should not be tolerated anymore. So moving forward, yes, back in the 80s and the 90s, for what I heard, because I wasn't there, there was a lot of, at the beginning I started as staying neutral with immigration, and there was some movement inside of the organization. As you might know, some people, it's a volunteer based organization. We depend a lot of people doing volunteer work and doing getting some memberships. So some members once you become a member, you can become part of an executive committee and take some decisions and run your a program in your area as you see best fit. So some people that start running these programs start having really strong anti-immigration stance. And for what I understand, that happened is that as time went by and these people started trying to organize against anti-immigrant, there was the counterpart that came up, and a group highly opposed to those came to voting, and those people that were doing the anti-immigrant stance were voted out. So we definitely right now, and I think for what it gave birth to the Borderlands program, which we are the only chapter in the country that actually has a Borderlands program. And by that being said, already says that we need to really, as an organization, strengthen our Borderlands programs, because as we were mentioning earlier, it's not only an Arizona thing. We have a lot of things happening in the country, and I wish there was more help and more people involved on this work in behalf of Sierra Club. I also wanted to say that the Borderlands program started not in an easy way, started really hard during those times, and little by little we've been like really pushing forward to show the importance of the Borderlands program, and how important it is to fund work related to protecting the lands in the border region as well. So right now, as we speak, it has been definitely easier as we move forward to a more inclusive era of the Sierra Club, where we're really moving away from all those different patterns that we had in the past, like in the 80s and the 90s. During this time, we're really looking forward to make sure that the communities that are on the front line, they're well represented, especially when we talk about the environment. We cannot just continue to talk about the environment without the communities that live on these environments. Like for us, that is actually, at least for me, is the most important part of the work. Engage with communities, community development, and try to elevate the voices of the communities that get affected by all of these injustices on the borderlands. So It's not easy, but we work. We do our best.
You know, I actually wanted to ask for a little bit more detail of specifically what Borderlands is involved in doing and what it would like to do in more specifics, because I'm super interested in this program and I really hope that it expands, you know, along the entire border. I would love to see that happen.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I think currently we are doing some things. We try to do. One of the things that is currently happening is we are on a litigation process with the U.S. government. We sued the U.S. government in 2019. We got Sierra Club versus Biden in a collaboration with Southern Border Community Coalition, and this is in behalf of all the illegal funds that were used to build the border wall. And 284 and 2808 is the codes for these funds that were originally allocated for military operations and drug-related issues. And all of these funds, we're talking about billions of dollars, were put into construction of border wall illegally by Donald Trump. So when that happened, we sued the government, and we are fighting, and I can unfortunately not disclose too much information about the current happenings or where we are right now because it's confidential for what I hear from the judge. So, but I can say a few things, you know. I think for us, and going back to Todd's first question about the environmental impacts of the border wall, we're really fighting for a lot of those funds that were used. There were some leftovers. When Joe Biden came into presidency, he stopped the border wall construction, so there were funds that were floating around. We want to make sure that those funds don't go to build more border wall, but they actually go to restoration of the environment that has been impacted by the border wall construction. And we're talking about restoring all those roads. We're talking about repairing those sheet flows. Sheet flow is the water moving across a road, because when they went with the bulldozers, they created what's called a berm on the side of the road, and that completely blocks the water from going to a place to another. Of course, wildlife passages, that's a huge issue on the borderlands right now. So we want to make sure that wildlife passages are integrated into the design of the border wall construction. One of our biggest asks that we're doing is to make sure that there is a thing that they included on the design called storm gates. These storm gates are, so when the monsoon season comes, they open these gates so the water can go through. You can see some on the San Pedro River that are actually open, I think, a year long, right? They're, most of the time, they close them sometimes, just on the monsoon season, but they're all over. And if you've been here long enough, you know that when it rains in the Sonoran Desert, we got something called the flash flood, right? And that water, when it comes so strong, and it has taken walls in the past. But the problem is not only that it will take the wall down, it will actually bring all this debris, pile it against the wall, and all the water that we depend on this side or they depend on the other will completely be blocked, completely changing ecosystems that have been living like in these environments for thousands of years. So we know also that these migration corridors are happening where there is a wash. Most of the desert creatures move through the washes. So we're advocating that they leave these storm gates open, and they leave them open all year long so they can serve as a storm gate to let the water go through, but they can also serve as a migration corridor for all these creatures. And we know Border Patrol has the technology. If they really want to track migrants through those spaces, they can do it. But why do we continue stopping wildlife migration? That is the big issue. And that's really the one we're pushing really hard on this litigation process. We're also pushing really hard on lighting. There is a lot of lighting structure that was installed. Some of you know desert creatures are nocturnal. So when you put big stadium lights in the middle of the desert, and a wall, and a huge road, and helicopters, and a lot of cars going on. That definitely affects the behavior of all of these creatures that call this place home. We're also making sure that with these funds that I discussed earlier, there is no more border wall construction on the Rio Grande Valley, and that they take all of the debris that was left on those staging areas, and there is a revegetation of these areas using native seeds. And one of the other things that we're asking is that there is funding for restoration of the habitat of the endangered species, such as the Sonoran desert bighorn, Sonoran pronghorn, and jaguar, ocelot, and the Mexican gray wolf. We are asking for them to allocate some funds for that as well. And we know that because these creatures cover such a large territory, other creatures will be positively impacted by this. And we want reports. We want to make sure that when they commit to something, they actually report back to us and they let us know what kind of work that they're doing, and if they're doing properly, and if they don't, well, we'll just sue them again, right? So I think that's going to be happening, and we are far away. We're really far on the negotiations, and we're hoping that very soon we're gonna have a settlement. So stay. I'll keep you updated.
All right.
Yeah, well, just one quick thing. Yeah, I think we should go to Q&A. I wanted to make one comment. I remember, like, I was talking to somebody from the Sky Island Alliance, and I asked, like, how long it would take with all the damage that's been done by all the border infrastructure, and they I don't know how correct this is, but they said it was going to take 500 years of doing nothing for the desert to restore itself. I thought, wow. But yeah, I think right now maybe we should go to Q&A. I did want to go into Q&A with one last question to you, and it's pertinent. This is actually Melissa. When we were brainstorming earlier, but what is not being covered that you see? Like, what are some stories that you see from your point of view that you'd like to see covered? And then are we gonna put a microphone around?
Yes.
Is that what it's gonna? Oh, all right, great.
Also want to say, since this is a podcast and it will come out later, if you don't want your name in the podcast, just when you ask your question, just don't say your name. Just a little heads up.
Thank you, Todd. That's a good question. And what's not being covered, or what's not being covered enough, I think, or supported enough, is also the good things that are happening. I think the narrative of the border, it is very negative. I usually ask people that comes from outside, it's like, hey, if you can define the border with one word, what word would that be? And it's like, you probably know what comes out. You know, the pattern tends to be really negative. But I think there is a lot of positive things happening. You know, there are groups. Actually, we have a group today in the crowd, Seeds from Nogales, that are doing amazing work, restoring some land and teaching people how to grow vegetables. People of color that is doing amazing work that we need to continue to highlight, especially, and really the more people knows about it, you know, that the border, it is, like we were saying, it's not that such a bad place. It is, there is great things happening, and I think if we continue to build on the good things, we're going to hopefully someday change that narrative and have the people also understand the importance of this. Sometimes when people from other parts of the country think about the borderlands, it's like this wasteland of doesn't have any life on it, and that the people that lives here don't care. And I think that reflects of the decisions that are being taken for people on the borderlands. They're usually not taken by people from the borderlands. They come from outside, and we are like right here in this territory, you know, that there is a huge overlap of cultures right here. There was an author, I don't remember his name, they call it the Third Nation, that we get all these different things that move through here, but there is also a reminder that there is a community that it is stable, that lives here and cares about this place, and really we also need to highlight that community as well. I think that's what I wanted to say.
I'm so glad you said that because you reminded me that the Border Chronicle is all about highlighting the work that border communities are doing, because border communities are the future. Basically, already we see migration, we see climate change, technology, like Todd was talking about, you know, is deployed here that will someday be used in the interior of the country. So everything that's going to happen in the interior of the country, you're going to see here first. So really, everybody here is a pioneer, you know, and doing really important work, and that's what we really want to highlight at the Border Chronicle. Too, I want to say also Dora Rodriguez is here, who has a migrant outreach center in Sassave that does really awesome work, and I know there's other folks here too. So we're hoping we can talk about that in the Q&A and maybe talk about what you all are working on and what you would like us to cover that you haven't seen covered, I think, from a border community perspective. So we will just pass the mic around to you all, and you'll be in the podcast.
Does your hand?
Given your remarks on the robot dog and facial recognition, as we see on the slide behind you, infrared and drone technologies, why do they build a wall at all?
Maybe you could answer.
It's mostly, I think, you know, for my understanding, once I start like looking at the facts and the players on the room, it is all political and economical, right? We know that it was the friend called Miles says the most expensive political prompt on U.S. history. And also we are talking about a business being made. A lot of people made a lot of money with that wall. So it's not really rocket science. It is the part that is always sad, you know, and as a culture we continue to do and put also that we always continue to leave the ecological part or the environmental part on the back, you know, like it doesn't really get acknowledged. And that's the part of the narrative that politicians use, and we need to really, as communities, really push politicians to put the ecological part or the ecological effort up in the front. I think we are in a time right now that we don't have time to lose, right? 500 years, I don't know if we're gonna get to see that many, you know. I think we are, right now, it is so important that we take direct action, like yesterday, you know, like that saying, you know, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, the other best time is now, and same thing with the border issues.
Any other questions, comments?
Hi, my name's Kathleen, and I'm from Buffalo, New York as well. So, and it made me think, like, the farther away from the border we are, the less I knew, at any rate. And then the closer I am to the border, it seems the sentiment is the less we want to know. I picked up a book by Miriam Davidson, Lives on the Border, or Lives on the Line, and it gave me a little bit of insight as to where I'm living currently and what's going on. So I'm more curious now, and that's why I'm here at the forum. My question is this: if I want to continue to be educated about this, how will the two of you continue to report the information that this gentleman is giving in terms of the Sierra Club and the chapter that he's involved with?
Yeah, I just want to say, if you are interested, Jan and Judith back there, they have a newsletter sign up. We send a newsletter monthly that you can hear some of the current actions, and of course, continue to or subscribe to the Border Chronicle as well.
Yeah, I mostly cover the Texas border issue, so the border wall around the National Butterfly Center is something I cover quite a lot of, and what's happening there right now, and Todd does quite a bit on Arizona, and he's also written several books on the wall and climate change and migration. And now I'm speaking for you, but
That's okay. Yeah, but we're rest assured, like we will. I mean, I would, as far as the Sierra Club, I would sign up with them for sure. But we're going to cover these issues with the Border Chronicle. These are important issues for us, and um, precisely why we asked Eric, like, for what are some of the stories that aren't being told or not being brought out enough. That's what I'm writing this down in my notebook right now. I already have like 4 story ideas just listening to Eric talk. So these sorts of issues are important, as well as all the other issues that we've talked about or what you see behind us. So we'll be doing our diligence and putting out 2 pieces a week going forward. So, yeah.
Thank you for being here, Todd and Melissa and Eric. I wanted to make a comment to play off of what Eric mentioned about the wildlife. And he and a number of us within the coalition are going to be starting a grassroots campaign to speak directly to wildlife connectivity. And I welcome you all to, this is kind of our mascot postcard my husband created with the Madrian Archipelago Wildlife Center, which is located in the western Huachuca Mountains. And we've been ground truthing border devastation for about 3 years now. And the wildlife issue, I wrote an opinion piece about in 2019 how they get through, and they still don't know how they're going to do it. So as Eric said, you know, we're in these meetings with Customs Border Protection and the 8.5 by 11 wildlife openings. And I just heard the word Stormgate the other day from Paul Enriquez. But so it's huge. And so if you would like to help us, we'll be unveiling it in the next few weeks because we're in the planning stages now. But I wanted to commend these writers. Todd's books are brilliant. I hope you brought some building bridges. No. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that out as a suggestion to the crowd of taking action, getting involved and speaking to your potential candidates about it too. We're in a very viable time, and I think the political issue of this walking along the border wall baloney, you know, and more border security. The wall doesn't work as it doesn't work. Anyway, thank you for being here and for letting me make a comment.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being in here. You guys are amazing. Big fan. Eric, amazing. The question I really had is just to, when you're talking, I'm picturing the border wall where we usually are, you know, putting water, taking a hike in those trails. And I always thinking, is there a camera here where not only the Border Patrol cameras, but you guys trying to get the pictures, you know, of our animals being cut out there or they're not even there. So is there any count on that? Because numbers are so important. I learned that to present to these crazy people who are doing our policies. And numbers are important and pictures. And look at this is the jaguar that could have crossed and it got stranded on the other side.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I also really admire the work you do. Thank you for your work. And cameras, yeah, there is a lot of cameras out there, probably not enough to document all of the wildlife passages that or activity that happens. I personally don't do that work. I won't take credit for that. Wildlands Network, it is an organization that spends a lot of time setting up these wildlife cameras in areas that they have already identified as migration corridors. So if you're interested to learn more about this and what comes out, I think Wildlands Network, it is a great organization that is doing amazing work documenting. Also Sky Islands Alliance and Cuenca Los Ojos in Mexico. There is a lot of cameras and tracking that they do. So really, we are in a really rich biodiverse area, especially right here in Patagonia. You know, this is the northernmost area where a lot of animals come from the south, like including a jaguar. You know, like who would guess that the Sonoran Desert might have jaguars? Well, we had, and I say we had because now definitely we're making it really hard for them. Hopefully they will still continue figuring a way to cross that border, but you gotta remember that nature has no borders, right? That is a completely human colonizing invention, right? I think so we also have right here the southernmost area where animals from the north and the Sky Islands, these really high mountains that we have around here, they have an amazing biodiversity. A lot of endemic species. The Pajarito Mountains, just west from Nogales, have endemic species as well. So it is an extreme valuable space here that we sit on. Yeah, I was saying nature has no borders. I like to say always, like I like to think like nature, right? Nature, it is for me personally, it's always been my best teacher. When I want to learn something, I try to go out and learn it from nature because they will. There's so many lessons to be learned there, and nature doesn't have the concept of those constructed walls. Has something called an edge, and an edge is when an ecosystem meets another one. Let's say a mountain and goes into the lower desert. And these edges are such an important part because that's where the most biodiverse areas are. Is where the species from one side meet the other ones from another. I like to think about the Borderlands region like this edge, that this amazing biodiversity happens. And also nature does something really interesting. When there is a big disturbance, send something called the pioneer species. They start like working the ground and make it habitable for the next generations to come. So I just want to invite you all to think about yourself as these pioneer species working on these really disturbed grounds and make it livable for the next generations that are coming behind us. I want to also say one day, hey son, look at this mountain, this is where the jaguars live. Instead of saying, look at this mountain, son, this is where the jaguar used to live, until we build that wall.
Speaking of the jaguar, did people see that the jaguar El Jefe was spotted in central Sonora? That's incredible news because that was here in the Santa Ritas. And apparently it was crossed the border a couple times. So there's an example of, right? Well, yeah.
It's a different bell in people's minds, I think. And Sky Island Alliance has a wonderful graphic that we use that shows we are actually at the juncture of 6 different biomes. And we have all the plants and animals from each of those biomes that pass through this area here. So we have greater biological diversity than anywhere else in the United States. And I want to be sure, too, that everybody is aware that E.O. Wilson, in his book, Half Earth, identified this region from scientists that he asked, who all agreed that this region is one of the top 5 regions in the entire world most in need of protection for species survival. And that is where we are. And one of the things that has to happen is take down that damn border wall, please, and thank you. And thank you for all the work that everybody's doing. But I wanted to be sure to speak those things out loud, because if anyone here doesn't know those facts, they are important facts to know.
Thank you so much. I guess, do we have time, Maggie, for maybe one more question or comment? Yes. Oh, well, okay. I know. Maggie brought us in. Now she's going to take us out. It's a very finicky microphone.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
It's working now.
Okay, 5 seconds. He's going to have to hold that battery in. Yeah, I have a question. How can we integrate more the question of humanitarian aid to migrants, migration, and the environment, the border wall, and global warming, climate change? Because humans are animals too, and we're having a lot of deaths in the desert for us animals. And so, you know, for example, there's a humanitarian aid coalition. There's the coalition you mentioned. How can we? I think it's really great we're all working together to put this presentation on. And how can we broaden that out and continue to speak more as a unified border voice?
Yeah, I agree with you, Maggie. I think we are all of those interconnections that are happening definitely and directly impacting the Borderlands community. Talking about immigration, a lot of people were asking me this morning, we had a volunteer training, it's like, why people showing up at the border? And it's like, or where do they come from and why are they here, you know? And I think it's an interesting question to ask, you know, and doesn't have one single answer. It all goes to a lot of different reasons that are pushing people away from their countries. And they are all like, it can be, for example, gang-related violence. It can be like economics. It can be that their government has a dictatorship, or it can be global warming. I think one of the things that is really important to acknowledge is that as we continue on this path that we are on of like continue really heavy on fossil fuels and just different things that are causing and also increasing the global warming effect. You see how in some countries, usually like communities, for example, Haiti. What happened in Haiti, I believe it was a couple years ago, that they were hit by 2 hurricanes of an intensity that never seen before. And what do we have here at the Borderlands? A group of people coming from Haiti that their homes were completely destroyed. We have people from Nicaragua or places that were growing food, and none of those lands are not suitable for growing crops anymore because the rain stopped. So I think it is important to think about global warming not like something that might come on the future, that is like hanging around there, but it's not gonna really affect us because it is already affecting us. It is indirectly impacting border communities and putting all the pressure on those communities that live there, and then like making them go through these journeys that are just incredible just to imagine, like leaving their homelands to travel across countries through all this suffering, or sometimes with small members of their family, and to come to a border where who knows what's going to happen. So I think it is definitely interconnected, and because what we can do, I always ask people, you know, like, what would you do if you have $30 million? And people will be like, wow. They always ask, how do you get to that number? Well, it's how much it costs to build 1 mile of border wall. So we start thinking, or really like, how do we really invest our resources? And we continue to put little band-aids here and there and spending really expensive band-aids and not really addressing the root causes of migration and global warming. And we continue to ignore, and we continue to just think about resources like they're unlimited, and we should have access to as much and as many as we can because we deserve it. then we are going to continuously fall in that trap and continue to cause harm to future generations and to communities that are already feeling the effects of this.
Yeah, just I helped write a report last year that looked at the top 10 emitters, historic emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, and the United States was number one for one. And then we looked at border and immigration enforcement budgets versus climate action, and the ratio for the U.S. was 13-1 in favor of border and immigration enforcement, and like in the billions and billions and billions of dollars versus climate action, right? And that sort of was in line. I mean, I knew that it was going to be the ratio. I had figured from previous reporting that that ratio was going to be pretty high, but even that kind of surprised me. And it's just amazing when you start parsing out the numbers, like Erick was just saying, and looking at them and thinking, well, couldn't that go in another place? Or if we start like questioning like those what is security? What does security mean? Well, how are we told that security is versus what is human security versus homeland security, right? And start asking those questions, all of a sudden different ideas start to percolate. And I think that's something we also have been like investigating journalistically, at least with the Border Chronicle, like trying to like look at some of those connections and draw those out and look at different ways of thinking or framing.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it.